Excellent. Hello. Now, we're going to the last section. This is marriage and culture. I've been saying, why marriage and culture? This was the impact of a lot of times economists have avoided culture, right, wrong, good, evil, because they didn't like touching on those soft utility functions. But those soft utility functions that are hard to measure create high utility. Don't steal, be honest, get jobs done, stuff like that. Those are all high utility things. Markets don't naturally create them. And they're easy to destroy. And we were talking about this before when we did corruption. It is easy to make a saint a sinner. It is difficult. It takes an act of God to make a sinner into a saint. I mean, even the Apostle Paul, who thought he was so holy, was, persecuting the faithful, and Christ basically had to attack nuke him. It's like an act of God. And so we talk culture. Now, marriage I mentioned here. People are like, oh, all the marriage rate's done. I still mention it because even if you're in the presence of evil, the truth matters. And so we're looking because remember, marriage affects the next generation. So while the theoretical fights over marriage are done and not done everywhere and stuff like that, the impact of it. What happens now is we ignore the damage. We don't say what it is because we don't like it, and so we ignore it. It's like what Britain did with the Muslim rape games in the United States. What happens, with a lot of child sex abuse cases with two men adopting children in rates that are disproportionate to other groups. We're gonna look at what impact does marriage have, and I'm a Christian. I approach this from a Christian perspective and the economic impact of it. And a lot of times, yes, I will be doing generalized. I'm going to be doing averages, compared to the alternative. Okay, as I said, marriage is not mentioned because a lot of economists, until you get to Dr. Sowell, a few before them, but really a lot of times before them, they just assume things are good. Remember we talked about the PPF and we said we assume deficiency. In fact, a lot of difficulty in economics happen because people assume efficiency and then realize, oh, look, things are not naturally efficient. Boogie boogie. That would happen. And so, so there's a tendency to ignore culture, ignore marriage, because in fact, but these things matter. And this is something we're seeing today. As you have, soil corruption, culture matters. As you lose high utility, high culture, it gets worse. I mentioned in Britain had functional rape gangs that for close to 3 decades, that the police intentionally, these were girls from the ages of 10 to 17 that were being regularly raped. In fact, 250,000 of them were raped. A number of them, vast majority of them, were gang raped. What did the government do? Nothing, because it make a group look bad, and then people would think, well, this group, so we're just going to thinking bad of a group is much worse than raping little girls. Okay, what are you destroying? High utility, because you are letting evil exist because you don't like the answer. What we just do? Boom, we destroyed law and order. You destroy law and order, it's very hard for your economy to function, if at all. Why destroy law and order? Well, the judge would have the wrong reaction. They'd all get upset. That's impact. Now, marriage, and when I'm talking marriage here, I'm being economist here, I'm being a Christian, I'm looking at male, female marriage. One man, one woman, that's it. Boom. When marriage has been attacked, male-female marriage has been attacked, if you go back and look at the attacks, go back and look at the previous 3 decades, it was never attacked by what will happen with the replacement. How good will the replacement do? How will the replacement work? It was attacked by perfection, which is, again, a communist tactic. Anything that's used a communist tactic, you have to wonder about. But it was attacked by perfection. Oh, well, there aren't enough married couples. Oh, these things happen. People cheat in marriage and stuff like that. Yes, but how is gay marriage going to solve this one? One time, I remember actually one man going, well, see, gay marriage will be so perfect and holy and pure that, oh, they're going to show the straights how to be married. You know, in Massachusetts, the two guys who got married, the first gay couple married, spent more time suing for the right to get married than they spent getting married. In other words, they were divorced less than a year later. Well, that's okay. They had the right to get married. And so you're having an impact. Now, everything, when I look at these things, remember, everything in this world, everything dealing with humanity is going to be imperfect because we are fallen creatures. Until the second coming of Christ, we're going to be fallen creatures. We'll be imbued with sin. So never compare things to perfection. Say, how will something compare? Well, how will this function? And then how will the other thing function? Will be better? Will it be worse? Stuff like that. In other words, we use God gives us outlines, and we use it as a base of measure. But again, we can use the pragmatic to accentuate. Again, marriage is an ancient institution. Going back biblically, you can go back. Like now, I read through the Bible every year, and I've restarted Genesis. And Genesis says, and a man will leave his wife and bind himself to his wife. So it is a contract. It's a contract that is one of the first things God talks about, is that two people come together. They will bind their lives together. Because that establishes how will children come into this world? How we bring children into this world? Who will be taking care of them? Who will be, fronting costs? Who will be thinking about them? Stuff like that. And marriage is there. In other words, marriage is not for the man and woman, but for the children who come in. And marriage is a rare contract because marriage binds third parties to that contract. All of the contracts don't bind a third party. You make a contract to somebody to deliver wood, that's between you and them. If you deliver wood and they don't pay you, yeah, you can go to the court and sue, but that's not what. That doesn't have anything to do with some guy who's got his lawn over there, or some person lives up there in a hill, or another person lives in the city. It has nothing to do with any of them, because why? Not binding on them. Marriage binds the third party. The general rest of society has no choice. They were committed. So in other words, societies for thousands of years says marriage, the binding of two people together, is so important that we will bind third parties who don't have a choice in that. Because normally in a contract, you have a choice to say yes or a choice to say no. Don't mind me. There we go. It's because my camera's reversed, so I look at myself. It's like it's shifted. So like my hand that's here that you see wiggling, that for me is on my left. But for you, it's probably on my right. But you know how it is. It kind of throws me off, gets me thinking weird. 88 dual dyslexia is a brutal thing. But we bind third party because it yields such benefits to the larger society, the larger nation, the larger culture. We say, yes, we will make them have to say, this is good, to stay with it. So we are binding them. So in terms of, marriage, male-female marriage is an exceptional economic institution in terms of its impact on people, on men and women, on children, on society at large. Because marriage defines how people interact. The idea of right, wrong, what you can do, what you cannot do, and stuff like codes of conduct. As I've already said, establishes a number of high utility and yields a number of micro and thus macro benefits from existence. And this one here, I like this. How to love an imperfect person unconditionally. See, that's the one aspect of marriage. See, nowadays, I see things be like, oh, I deserve a person who's this. I deserve a person who's that. In other words, people want a spouse. They want a slave. They want a person who comes in. They want a manservant, a maidservant, or something like that. They don't want someone to be with. Because see, in the ideal aspect of marriage, you worry about the mote in your eye. And the nice thing is, is your spouse knows you're not worried about the mote in their eye. I should say the log in your own eye, but you see it. But that's the whole point, is the other person you love, and you know they love you, and so you have, so it's, that's, you have the potential to forgive the person and not worry about being perfect, because we're not going to be perfect. It's beyond us. And so that is a benefit. It's funny because a lot of times I look at the benefit, having been married for over 30 years, not just on the positives we go through, but on the downside of knowing, which is a tough thing your generation is labored under, your generation before you, is thinking everything should be perfect, everything should be wonderful. I shouldn't have anything that cause me to stub my toe. I should be wrapped in bubble wrap, and if there's anything wrong, it can't be my fault, because why? A lot of people default, I am just so wonderful, I am just a gift, it's the other person's fault. So what I'm doing, I'm putting on the other person owes me, and stuff like that. I don't have anything towards them, and that's not marriage. In terms of that's not putting together, because that's why you said you love the other person better than you love yourself, and that's something that's lost, because, and this is something, when we did remember we talked about the me, people pick on your generation saying, oh, they're all me. That was something people talked about in the 70s. Me. That's something you can go back to ancient times and we talk about me. And a lot of people talk about self-sacrifice. Usually what they mean is, I'll pick an economist here, in the socialist, and the Greens, which they fit in. Oh, all of you should be willing to suffer for my great ideal. It'll teach you peasants self-sacrifice. Well, I will feel like I'm sacrificing so much by telling you peasants to self-sacrifice. Not being cruel, I'm pointing out. I apologize. Now, these are a number of benefits yielded, like, on exam, I'd probably ask to explain like 5 of them or something like that. There are more than 5. You can explain any number of them. These are benefits yielded by monogamous, in other words, one-on-one, male-female marriage. We're not talking Elon Musk having his, his various, females at the moment, who he has 14 or whatever. I think he's trying to be an Ottoman sultan. Although I guess if he dies and the kids can kill each other, I know you may be saying, wait a minute, you like Elon Musk. I like aspects of him, but he's a pig man. In fact, he's a pig man who believes, since I'm rich, I can do these kind of things. Which is like, no. In fact, when you take God's law, God says the law applies to the meek and the mighty. Equaling the law. Now, here's a nice one. Married men on average earn about an extra 10 to 40% income compared to unmarried men. And a lot of that goes to responsibility of a family. Men work harder, they work longer, they seek a better return, they take fewer sick days, they don't do things that might cause them to get fired. Now, all these things are secondary, but because they're doing these things to support their family income is going up. They're producing more for the general economy, which, they're not doing that for that reason. They're doing it so they can, live better and do well. But also, they're sparing the rest of society the expense of taking care of their children, because they are doing it. They are paying for it. In fact, you can say that the extra output they generate is a positive externality. In fact, when you get the second thing, we go the other side, I apologize. But the extra output's a positive externality. So they're relieving the positive externality. They're sparing everybody else in society the expense taking care of the family, because they're taking care of it. That's a positive externality. They are producing more on average. That is a positive externality. Parents and children learn to invest time and effort into something beyond themselves. I know this crosses over with private property. Private property, learn that becomes part of your culture, because you say, how will this work for me? Here, what's happening is, it's not so much the material item they're doing, but they are looking at what? I am raising that other person. I am investing time in them. I'm investing time in my children. I'm investing time in my spouse. They're investing time in me. Will it always be perfectly? No, it will not. In terms of, but you putting in time and effort into people realizes benefits over years, over decades. And that is a great, because go back and it relieves burden on the rest of society. These two items here. First, gonna deal with the thing with the yellow. Communist countries have hated marriage; they detest it. In fact, you can go back to Karl Marx writing the Communist Manifesto and other things. He called marriage change. He said women are being enslaved and they're being controlled by men. In fact, it was recorded by Betty Friedan in the '60s, who was an upper class woman, had all sorts of goodies, but it's like, oh, I cannot do anything. It's like, because she created all these minds of, I'll have this fantastic job that pays me, which some high tech companies did stuff like this. They went bankrupt. In fact, one of the ones that did this, actually, the conga line of having a thing where people just having snacks all day, no one's actually doing work at the company. They're getting a paycheck for being lounge lizards. That company went bankrupt. It ended up with billions in debts. And it went bankrupt, and they brought the old CEO who once built it up and kind of bought all these lines because he thought it'd be cool. Instead, he discovered, oh wait, it doesn't work. I'm not being cruel here. So, but communist countries hated marriage. In fact, I think one of the reasons is because the fact of, in fact, interesting is Marx said not just things I told you about marriage. He also said, besides calling it selfish, because why? The women and men, particularly women, are not sharing themselves with all men. And he called marriage selfish because the husband and wife were putting the spouse and their family above the state, above the dreams of the communist dictatorship. And so that's just so evil, because we all should be united in solidarity, moving forward and feeling good. It was being what? Led by some person who considers themselves an elite, should be leading the peasants for their own good, because the peasants, just these itty bitty peasants, they're so stupid, but the elite would be so good in terms of, and so they want the commitment to believe just to their ideals. Family gets in that way. That's why when communists attacked the institution, they attacked faith and family, because both of them put something before the state. In fact, that philosophy is creeping them out. Really sounds pious, like people are so selfish when they're married. No, they're putting someone else before themselves. No, they're not doing it for my goal. Now, people talk like that. In other words, I'll pick on Gwyneth Paltrow because I mentioned earlier. She owns a castle in England. Well, it's a stone building made in the 16th century, stuff like that. The thing leaks hate like a sieve. It's a stone building. What do you think? But she likes it warm because she's stick thin. Now, she's spending her own money, so I don't really care. But it's a person who, talk about everybody else not sacrificing to save the climate. It's like, you like your giant chateau castle in England to be in a nice raw 80-degree temperature in the middle of English winter. Well, that's gonna cost a lot of energy. No. She's special. So, and she's one of the ones who says during the summer, RAC should not be allowed to be lower than 80. And during the winter, we shouldn't have heat above 65 because we're burning up all the fossil fuels, stuff like that. It's like, we're creating a lot of stuff to burning fossil. It's like, oh. So is that one. So communists attacked it because the communists want the control, the dedication to just their ideal. Don't mind me, I'm tilting a bit because I got pace a little bit. Now, marriage and money is always a great one. I've been married for 30 years. How many times my wife and I have argued about money? Less than 5. Because we've never done this. We have faced everything as us, as a unit. When you do my money and his money or her money or whatever, you've automatically set your spouse as a rival, as an enemy who might be taking from what you want. Now, because we all have that selfish thing. It's not saying, oh, it's like, no, we recognize that. But when you say yours and theirs, when you separate that, the person's a rival for your resources. They're a rival for that. In fact, it gets in when you see people. You'll have people say like, "And this is mine, and that person should pay for this and pay for the house, the rent, or something like that, and all the bills, and what I'm having should be mine." Okay, we obviously you just want them there as a paycheck. Well, no, it's all together. No. What you're saying is theirs is shared, yours is for you. Otherwise, they're stealing from you. Look at the way you're thinking. So we gotta, they be together, they pool together, and that's an important distinction. Restraint and self-control. I don't mind being control. People think before they engage in actions, they've thought about the impact. Now they don't always, but this is taught. It can again, marriage creates that item there. It doesn't mean it makes it go away. It doesn't keep people from being bad. Human beings will be bad. I've known people who have left their spouses because they want to go chase off somebody else. But it makes it more likely you're going to do that. Now, related to restraint and self-control is self-sacrifice. This one is, quoting as Christ loved the church and died for it, the husband should love and die for his wife. And the wife acts like the church and gives for the husband. What they're giving to each other, self-sacrifice. They're putting each other before themselves, and they're both putting children before themselves. And so they're learning to invest their time and effort into others. Again, these two things have rippling into other actions of society. Once I do self-control at home, I practice it everywhere. It makes it easier for us to work together. Once I'm doing self-sacrifice at home, it leaks into the rest of society. And when we talked about the collapse of Afghanistan, when we talk about that, the Afghan military, outnumbered the Taliban. See, 400,000 to about 5 or 6 to 1. And they fell in less than 2 months. Because why? The Afghan military had neither of these things. The Taliban did. And so those are ripple effects. Interestingly enough, married women, men and women both, have better health and lower healthcare costs. Married couples tend to live longer, about 15 years than singles. They have fewer and lower healthcare costs. It is significantly different. So if I want to lower healthcare expenses, I promote marriage, male-female marriage. Just like I told you at the beginning, if someone's saying I'm going to have nationalized healthcare and the government's going to control it all and segment and stuff like that, well, if the government's going to do that, it's going to be technocratic. Guess what? Boom, we abandon promiscuity. Boom, we abandon certain acts because why? They are unhealthy. They increase the cost. They mean people have to consume it, which is totally avoidable. Put things where they were not meant to go. Boom, don't be a promiscuous. Don't be the freaking Motel 6. It's going to lower a lot of cost. See, married people tend to have low healthcare costs. And also married people usually paying for their own children, which lowers the cost for everybody else. Women have a lower rate of suicide. Contrary to popular belief, which is usually promoted by feminists who are trying to achieve things, women in marriage are far more content and happy than single women and divorced women. In other words, they're better off than both of them. In fact, when UK did a study on suicide rates and stuff like that, they found that among single women, the suicide rate is 2-3 times higher than married women. In fact, this is one of the studies that they said this should be banned because it's going to say, sleeping around is not as good as being married. We can't let people hear that. They might react in a way we don't like. In other words, think about the impact. And going back to the rapes, but think about the impact. The government willingly lied. The government put people at risk because it didn't go with the government's vision. So the government was willing, and this is the impact from communism, willing to sacrifice the people the government exists to protect to proceed with the government policy they wanted. And you actually do that in the private sector. If I find out something doesn't work, I don't do that again. Because why? It didn't work. It cost money. It failed. The government's intentionally, because why? They are not the one paying. In other words, if this was happening in the UK, and everybody in the top 1% got it, they'd be like, oh, it's so bad. It's like when they had the LA riots. You had a guy who worked for, I think it was ESPN. He was cheering the rioters on, saying, yeah, burn it down, destroy everything. They have articles, destroy everything. Then when the riots got within a quarter mile of his house, they were burning houses down that close. He's like, where are the police? Why are the police not protecting me? We need to be shielded. Oh, you just didn't care if the other people were getting killed. It's, I don't know, but so the woman had, interestingly enough, male suicide rates are unchanged. No, it's just the rationale is different as why. So when men get married, they have different stresses around them, and so their suicide rate's unchanged. 7, as a unit, they're better off financially, which we've discussed with men earning more, but then it tends to continue with everything else. In other words, they control cost, they don't waste as much money, they make fewer claims than the rest of the population. It's an interesting one, which is the earlier one. Dinks, double income, no children, which we talked about in overpopulation, consume more resources than married couples of the same income level. And not just that, they are more entitled. In other words, a dink is more likely to say, double income, no kids, that the rest of you should pay for them to have a great retirement. And they need vacations paid by the government something like that every year. And people can pay for it because they need it because they're so good. They're more likely to do that than married couple are. Human units are happier on all levels compared to other units, emotional and physical. This is a utility item, but again, if everybody involved is happier, it makes them better off. As I said, again, not perfect, happier than the alternative. In other words, this couple here, they're happier than the alternative. I'm getting up and down just because, as I said, I get that thing in the legs item, so I get antsy. But they are happier than other people. And I can explain why. You can talk Christian studies about it. Children are better off. Again, we're not rating this by perfection. We say, oh, children should have heard something. Not rating it by perfection, rating it by the alternative. What is the other thing will happen? Go back to the scandal in England. The girls who are being attacked tend to be poor because they're more likely to, you're more likely to get away with it. And they tend to be from broken homes because, again, you're more likely to get away with it. In other words, who's getting hurt in this? The poor, the left behind. The ones who the socialists say, we will save and protect these people. The evil capitalist wants them dead, but the lovely socialist government will cover and give them a blanket and take care of them and love them. Oh, wait, it didn't. Children tend to be better protected. Heck, you have the old thing of the fact of, I have to watch out for certain things because, her father will hunt me down and shoot me. That kind of situation. Always cool. As a father, I can understand that. Remember the quote we said way at the beginning? A face only a mother could love. That's wonderful. Now, I'm not picking somebody. It's a cool quote, but it means what? Somebody says, in all the universe, you are unique. You are special. You rate. That's stunning. %. Number 10. I probably said 10%, my bad. Number 10. Only 2% of children in male-female marriages. And again, I'm not pulling a Cynthia McKinnon. Cynthia McKinnon, no, we'll deal with her in the next, the negative side. Only 2% of married male-female couples will stay poor their entire life. In other words, they'll be poor at some point. We all are. Well, not all of us. A lot of us will be. When my wife and I were married, I was in grad school. She was doing her master's and such. We were poor. We were living tight. We were poverty. When all my brothers and sisters got married, they were poor. None of us are poor now. I'm middle class. My oldest brother, he's upper class. My other older brother, he's upper class. And then you may be saying, well, why are you middle class? I went into teaching. That's that's it. That's me anything bad there. But I went into teaching. That's why I'm middle class. There's nothing against that. But the whole point is see, when you deal with children from single parents, the children will stay poor their entire life. Unless half the children stay poor their entire life, which means those children are going to be falling under the care of the state, which means they're going to be hitting the rest of us with fees and costs and taxes to pay for them. Whereas if they were coming from married couples, they'd be taking care of themselves. The married couple is taking care of it. The rest of society is not touched. We are reducing the cost of children because somebody, we're not yielding it. So that's a productive impact. That is a productive impact. Poverty is in standard life. Poverty is a transitional case. It happens to everybody. The damages, the destruction of male-female marriage. What happens when we destroy a male-female marriage? We break it down. We wage war against it. We seek to disable it and stuff like that. I'm not being cruel. I'm pointing out the reality of it. So these are things when you get rid of it, what occurs. Now, at the core of it, in the sense of, remember what marriage is: a social institution. The people who are going against marriage, male-female marriage, are doing that because they wish to change society. In fact, you go back to Greshme's writing. It's Gresham, but he was a communist in Italy in the 30s. He fled the Soviet Union, and the Soviets, killed him because the proper communist viewpoint. But he was a heavy communist. The fact of the dictator of the weak is the one who says what it is. But he wrote and said the reason communism cannot conquer the West is because of the presence of Christianity and families. We must eliminate both of them so we can have the new system come in that we want. So we'll destroy everything else because they want to restructure society along new lines. Remember, if I want to restructure society, I make society break down. A functional society says, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. A dysfunctional society says, save me from my problems. So when people want to restructure society, they'll intentionally break society to do that. And again, they never measure it by the alternative. They measure it by perfection, saying, this will solve all that problems. This is like the mayor of New York, Mondani. A Nepo baby, by his own admission. And again, he's the worst kind of Nepo baby. If you're rich and successful and you own the firm and you're employing your child, cool, have fun. When you are working for somebody else and you advance your child and your child is an idiot, you've effectively stolen from that firm, but you don't care because it's a big firm they can afford to pay for it. That's why Disney's overrun with idiots. In fact, heck, what's discovered the movie Supergirl that's bombing? It was written by a person who had one writing credit. A short. That's an impact. So, critical theory, talk about that. It was destroyed because it wanted to create a new social order. There are far fewer marriages. In every country has gone to gay marriage and other marriages or whatever. You've seen marriages decline. They've become a joke. In fact, among your generation, they say less than, maybe only half of you will get married. Okay, why is that? Marriage has turned to a joke. It's a punchline. And so when it becomes that, before people said if I wanted to be with somebody, I had to get married. So I'd go and get married, and I'd have all the implied societal implications what you need to do. Now it's like, why bother? It's just a joke. And also the current, item they're doing, and I said it was gay marriage, what they're doing, is the fact of We are celebrating a self-first ideology, and we are demanding others bend to our will. Because that's what you want to do. It's like, I want to keep things what they were. They wanted to say, I'm going to have these other arrangements, and the rest of you must worship my arrangement and say it is good. Otherwise, you are oppressing me. Now, keep in mind, feminists, I mentioned Cynthia McKinney, we'll come back to her. They love to trash male-female marriage and say it shouldn't exist. In fact, they say, well, we have to allow the choice. Women shouldn't take it. No woman should be allowed to get married or be at home with their children. That shouldn't be allowed. That's oppression. If they want to do it, who are you to say? No, it should be allowed. And Cynthia McKinney went to this work saying, going back to women and men being better off physically too, is they say, oh no, she did a report in the '90s, a theoretical article on seeing people in marriage are abused so much more. You know how she did an article? My wife and I would not have been accepted for the article as part of the sample because we've been married for 30 odd years. It's going to bias the article and make married couples look better. So she eventually settled on counting, removed a lot of married couples from her sample. And so in other words, she self-selected the sample, but she went further. She added in people who had long-term boyfriend or girlfriend as married. People had a boyfriend or girlfriend living with them as married. And people just had a different boyfriend coming in every few weeks as married because she really was thinking of being married. But those aren't marriages. But they wanted to create a nice, so she basically lied. The rise of divorce. I mentioned before, within a year of the creation of gay marriage in almost any place, the divorce rate passed heterosexuals. In the case of lesbians, the divorce rate is over 80% within just a year or two. In terms of the divorce has risen. And it's also risen among, heterosexuals. But because go back to number one, you made marriage a joke. And we changed society. What's making me feel good? In fact, all its driver was the idea of not divorce, but the drive about gay marriage. In fact, you go back to the 80s, 90s, you'd have gays going back and forth. No one's talking about gay marriage. We don't want gay marriage. That's for you heterosexuals. We don't want that. They're lying. They're saying we're going to do this. We're not going to do this. They're lying. A decade later, they were doing it. Well, if we told you the truth, you might have stopped us from getting special privileges, and we wanted special privileges. That's what they'll say. But then that violates, the idea of treating everything by the same standard, about telling people the truth, seeing what they can make this known. The alternatives, gay marriage and other sorts, we've loosened monogamy. We've much more selfish behavior. It's all about me feeling good, what makes me feel better. There's no investment, no long-term involvement, no improving. Everyone tends to, separate more. In fact, that's why we have far higher rates of depression and loneliness today in the world with the death of, faith and, the death of, conventional marriage, stuff like that. People more depressed. That's why you go back, 5, 6 decades, have men being like, why is my wife upset with me? I'm working a bloody coal mine every day trying to provide, money, and she feels she's oppressed. In fact, one of the things that a feminist is saying, no, we should have equal thing in all the jobs because it's not fair. One goes, okay, well, here are the most prevalent jobs. No. We need the cool jobs that pay lots of money. These are the average jobs that exist. No, I don't like those jobs. I should have the job that pays real well for knowing nothing. It's because she wants what? Everything now. Government promotes. Remember, the government has an interest. The government's interest should be the benefit of the population, period. But the government has an interest in dysfunctionalists. Broken people need the government to save them. Functional people tend to not want the government. So, for example, married couples want the least government interaction. Single with children, the most. And so you have, single children. I'll do this one. Tennessee changed this law 3 decades ago, in which if you have children in Germany, the father of the children, the biological father, must pay support. This one guy was suing, saying it's not fair. He had 31 children by 11 different women, and he shouldn't have to work this much and pay for them. I'm like, why? And he goes, well, somebody should pay this children. It shouldn't be me. A very selfish attitude. The government was paying for those children because he couldn't pay for them. Why was he doing that? Because he could get away with it. It was what he wanted. And more governments will promote what fails because it creates the need for more government. And I'm saying that's unethical, yes, but think of the government as an organic creature trying to grow the government. War is waged against traditional point of view. In other words, the idea of free debate, discussion, what's right, what's wrong, we can hash it over, we can have different opinions. All those things go by the wayside. Say you don't believe in gay marriage, and you'll get fired. To quote, when they had a Miss Universe contact, a few of them, and one of them, Miss California at the time, said, I don't believe in gay marriage, I believe in traditional marriage. And they had a gay judge, which is weird having a gay man judge women since he doesn't like women, but go like, that's stupid, and use the B word, and use the C word too. She should know what the answer is. And there's only one answer, and yes, it's the politically correct answer. And she's too stupid to know that she shouldn't be allowed to be in these contests. And in terms of, that's more ways against it. Canada, you said you can't speak about Britain too. You can't speak about these things because you go to jail. They'll punish you. You said words that hurt me. Now, you notice these punishments, it doesn't make the law equal. In other words, they can hurt my feelings all the time. Well, that's okay. But you can't hurt their feelings. In terms of that's an impact. I said the Canadians, Australians, New Zealanders, they punish you for not, for supporting the traditional viewpoint of marriage and as such and traditional religion, and they punish you for what? For having that wrong opinion. You shouldn't be allowed to have that opinion. What we do, we destroy the equality law. Once people know that, they're going to game the law. That's why you had, in Britain, this is a game of the law. A guy was knifed to death. They called out the people who knifed him called 911, said he called us bad words. And when the police came, the guy had this natural discoloration spot in his skin. You see, I go boo boo, he hit me. The police, talked to the guy, was like, he's good. The guy's on the ground, so I was been stabbed. I need help. No, you don't use these kind of words. We'll bring you to jail for doing that. We witnesses. You said bad words to this person. He didn't say any bad words. He got stabbed because he could get stabbed. And, that's an impact. Okay, number 6, the rise of suicide among singles, especially homosexuals and transgender. I shouldn't say the rise. What is the suicide rate's the same it was decades ago. In other words, people theoretically say, well, once we accept all transgender, you have this one, Tallarico, the guy running sex was, oh, all the transgender children are dying. No one is born transgender. People are convinced to be transgender by the use of the school system, by adults, by groomers and stuff like that. Because a lot of people say we're following Ahad, these things should be allowed to do, and we should do what we want. The suicide rate goes up. The suicide rate among transgendered is the same as it was in the 50s and 60s when it was definitely not accepted. Well, it's all more accepted now. Why is it not there? And again, remember, forced acceptance is totalitarian. I have the strength to bend using my will. When people engage in a lifestyle, it doesn't make them happy, and they get what? POs is saying, if only everybody else were my slave and do what I wanted, I would feel better. That's what they're demanding. Just like in Canada, they have rules saying you have to explain why you don't want to date a transgender person. Well, because the guy wants to date a girl, and this isn't a girl, it's a guy, and they don't have the proper equipment, right? Oh, that's oppression. How dare you do that? You should be forced to date. Why? Are the rules you have to say you have to date ugly people or people with bad body odor or, just no. And so, that's an impact. Children suffer more. Again, these are comparisons, but children with single parents, alternative lifestyle, have 7 times the poverty rate, 6 times the murder rate, 3 times the crime rate, 3 times the pregnancy rate out of birth rates that other people do. In fact, my brother-in-law, the one who gets mugged, his brother-in-law would be like, oh, do you know there were more teen pregnancies in the 50s than they are now? Ha 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 ha. It's like, dude, you either, basically he's doing a half-truth. Do you know what the average marrying age of a woman in the 50s was? 18. When was she having her first child? 19. She's a teenage mother. Yeah, but she's married. And you separate that out, it's like, oh, her children function like that worked normal for married people. There was no change. But he wanted to be sensational. You know. Okay, this is the old figure, but it's there. You know, and the two life cycles are the same. Gays, according to CDC in 2000, and their own figures, have about 150 to 180 different partners a year. That's not really safe. That's very expensive. They have a short life expectancy, about 40 years for gay men, 50 years for gay women. They cost more than it. I'm just pointing this out in terms of people, you promote this lifestyle, people do more of it, they fail more often. In fact, the funny thing is education is skewed so much to make people feel better, going back to the previous one, that, you know, when you go through college students and say, you know, what's the likelihood of you getting a disease, getting sick? Gay men think they're the least likely to get diseases from being promiscuous, whereas women who have not had sex think they're the most likely. They're the most likely to think they're going to get some venereal disease. Why? Because everything was constructed to make the gay men feel good, to make their lifestyle look good, like nothing bad can happen. It happens to these other people. It's kind of like, what is it? When Netflix did a drama on the knifing scandals in the UK, not just this last night incident, but, you know, lots of crimes with knives. They made, it's some white 11-year-old boy who's been indoctrinated in neo-fascism. Well, no, actually, the people doing knife crimes, over 90% of them are, you know, Islamic and black and stuff like that. The white population is less than 10%. But it didn't fit the narrative, so they what? They lied. Okay, now going on to culture, what I call the good and bad and the ugly. Remember, culture determines what is good, bad, right, wrong, good, evil, beautiful, ugly, stuff like that. In fact, a lot of people get upset when President Reagan made this, you know, statement 50 years ago. Freedom is never more than one generation from extinction. We don't pass it on to our children in our bloodstream. In other words, it must be fought, nurtured, developed. In other words, a cultural point of view. People must learn how to behave, learn to accept freedom, learn to know what it means. And a lot of people go upset saying, oh, you're saying that we learn that. No, you're saying other people don't know freedom. No, most people know license. I can do what I want. You bow over and say what I'm doing is great. That's what most people know, what most people want. And that's, you know, is again, not dealing with the reality. So culture, high utility, right, wrong, good, evil. Okay, two different cultures. Or is this one in terms of, and they're not going to yield the same result. Now keep in mind, classic multicultural, true multicultural says, I have a different result than you. I accept the responsibility of my actions. But a lot of times we have bad multicultural that say all cultures should give the same result. No, they won't. Borrow this quote from Muhammad Ali. I hated every minute of training. But I said, don't quit. Suffer now and live the rest of your life as a champion. Work, grind, push at it. That's how you get things. Compare with the countercultural quote from the song, I don't want to work, I just want to bang on a drum all day. Okay. These are two different cultural outlooks. They are two different cultures. The Muhammad Ali culture will produce your A's. In other words, you get people exactly the same, but they're going to get A's because why? Did you do that? Point I made before. People reading books. Among groups in the United States, there are people who read books, 10 hours a week. And it goes down through their children. Another culture in the United States where people read about 5 minutes a week. Okay, who do you think is going to dominate everything? The A's are. The F's, the people getting hammered, they're going to fail. In other words, 9 times out of 10, they may have jobs, stuff like that, but they're not going to beat the A's because the A's are used to grunts. They're two different cultures. Who's going to dominate everything? The A's will. In other words, people look and say, yeah, who's running everything? The A's are running everything because why? Oh, they work hard, they learn. But then the F's will say, it's not fair. I should have everything the A's have. It's because people are being mean about my culture. My culture is good as theirs. They're not willing to accept responsibility for their culture. You have people say, why shouldn't I have to change to have success? Well, I mean, you want to be a doctor, but you want to do the study, 40 hours of studying a week. You have the chance of becoming a doctor, but that's what you need. Well, it shouldn't be that way. I should just have it. And a lot of people think that. They think someone can hit you with the fairy wand. All of a sudden, you know what you need to know. What traits yield positive economic results? So what I call work culture. These things yield positive results. These things make nations and peoples better off. By the quote, one of the books in the Bible in terms of New Testament, deacons likewise must be dignified, not double-tongued. It was not lies, so that not addicted to much wine. Don't be, alcoholics, and not greedy for dishonest gain. See, honest gain, a lot of people pick the next one. Honest gain is you go out and you do what? You earn your living through an honest manner. I produce, I build, I create, I generate goods, I sell these goods, and I earn money from it. Okay, male-female marriage we've covered already. In other words, your work cultures tend to like male-female marriage. They will like honesty. Tell the truth. Now, we don't. A lot of times when people want to get rid of honesty, they attack and they use brutally honest. Where someone's not being honest because they want to enlighten their brother or sister, they're doing it because they want to be cruel to their brother and sister. So someone's trying to be brutally honest because they want to hurt. They want to do damage and the such. Virtue. Again, virtue is always difficult because it's like, when you see it, I always call it doing what is right when nobody's looking. If you have those two, and if they are celebrated and praised, you reduce all the bad things in society. Corruption will go down, government waste will go down, your government workers will be better, crime will go down, you'll have a much better, higher functioning society. Lower cost, more economic growth, better standards of living. But again, people say, well, that's not fair. My culture is good. Hardworking. Again, the larger sizes, these, do your job, do it right, do your best. Self-sacrifice. Again, going back to my example, I put other things before myself. And again, faith and family reinforces and magnify it. I mentioned before, when I picked on Hollywood people, a lot of them want what? Self-sacrifice. They want other people to give up for their dream. They don't mean men. They don't mean them. They mean somebody else should. The peasants should give for a greater dream. That's what they mean. That's not the same thing. In fact, in communist countries, butchered millions, tens of millions. Use that as an excuse. The government didn't say, why didn't this work? No. The dream is worth anything the peasants need to pay. Morality and moral people are liked and praised by exemplars. Had example of the good and the right and the just. We say we want to be like them. Those are the people we say we want to be like. Look at the way they act. They're good people. They're good guys. Nowadays in our culture, we call them chumps. Right? It used to be they were praised. Business people, entrepreneurs, respect as builders, creators. And it's important because if you respect them, you generate more of them. You need these people to make markets function, adjust, adapt, and move. The country has the same heroes. Go back to Pappy Boyington. Pappy Boyington was praised not for his negative traits. So they talk about recognizing negative traits. He was praised for his heroism. Buying this from President Grant. Hold fast the Bible. To the influence of this book, we are indebted for all the progress made in true civilization. To this we must look to as our guide in the future. In other words, he was a fallen man with weaknesses. He had, he suffered alcoholism. And he said, hold fast the Bible. Because that's what? That puts things above you. It sets a godly standard that we must strive to. We won't ever achieve it perfectly because it's beneath us. Children are loved. They are viewed as special by society. The future means something personal. The children mean something personal. And it was that item. When my wife and I first had children, a few different places I worked part-time. And when we brought the kids to where my wife and I went to grad school and she went to undergraduate, people there, particularly among the students, would look at the children and be like, oh, why'd you have one of those? You should have had an abortion so you can have a life and stuff like that. Oh, that's so horrible. One of the places where I was working, a lot of college was like, oh, that's so cute. Oh, look at a little child, stuff like that. And they'd smile and talk to them and stuff like that. A different mentality, and so, children, how are they loved? Are they cared for? The future means something. The macro nation, your people, your nation is special. Because remember, that is something we say should be preserved. I mean, there's a picture of Arlington Cemetery. That's something to be preserved. All those people served and died. They put something before themselves. Why? Because our nation is special. Our people are special. We, should do that. And so there's self-restraint is praised because people keep their passions in check. Dysfunctional cultures, failed states have certain negative traits. And these are culturally negative traits that hurt economic performance. They create more corruption, they create more stealing, they create more lying, they create more cheating. And remember, people will do anything to get by because it makes them better off. I'll bow this quote. Cowards die many times before their deaths. The valiant taste death but once. It means cowards always running because they're worried about themselves. The valiant, they self-sacrifice. Well, the card's going to say the common thing of, well, if I'm dead, I don't get any benefit. Now, a thing I point here, and I'm going to point again, multiculturalism. The worst thing people can do is attach negative cultural traits to ethnic groups. That is BS. That is cradola. Racists do this regularly. Racists have, and the worst thing I've seen racists do it all over the place. It's like, oh gosh, it causes my mind to bleed. Because if you go back to the 50s and 40s and before then, a lot of people who were racist attached all the good cultural traits to their ethnic group, and the bad cultural traits, they were just inborn to this other group. So see, it was just genetic. Now you get the same thing. The weirdest thing is when, was this, this is in the Smithsonian, and they had these traits are, white cultural traits, being to work on time, getting your work done. It's like, it's all these good traits. And it's like, it's someone's doing them, they're being white. It's like, no, these are things that work. And so, that's an impact, that's a damage. So you don't ever attach traits to ethnicity. That is bullcrud. When people want to keep doing evil things or want to have more power or leverage, they do that. They intentionally stick people because it works for the leadership. Again, cultural traits are mutable, changeable. Anybody can do evil or good. Anyone can learn to be a hero. Anyone can learn to be a coward. They're mutable, changeable. Cheating is acceptable. In other words, in negative cultures, bad cultures, failed cultures, cheating is perfectly acceptable. Or to borrow the old phrase, it's only cheating if you get caught. When you have stuff like that, you suffer damage. Things aren't built, they aren't developed, they aren't improved. People lie regularly because why? People cheat for advancement. It's there. Let's take the last leader of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev. How did he get noticed by the party so he could advance? When he was in college, he turned in his best friend for drinking. Because the Soviet Union really had getting drunk. The Soviet Union had big laws about getting drunk. They wanted people working, not coming to the factory, hammered. And also they wanted to get rid of male-female marriage. They rescinded that one later because it didn't work, but so you can cheat. Lying is okay. Again, it's related to cheating, but it's an odd word, to hurt, to mislead, to trick. Lots of stuff. I said, go back to the whole thing of climate change. If people were really concerned about it, they would measure by the same standard. They'd find out what it is. Are there, urban effects of heat and stuff like that, which can change. They want to find out the truth. No. We have our truth. Just like it was discovered, the Fauci thing with the drugs and his miracle cure kill people, which everybody knew, but remember they banned it. So lying's okay. Lie, cheat, it's okay. To borrow from Joe Stalin, a single death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic. Favor seeking. The people in the firms will seek special favor from the government. In other words, I'm a giant megacorp, so especially the megacorps, you're ultra rich. They'll go to the government to get special favors because the government can say you win. No matter what else has happened, they can say you win. We picked on this before. We talked when the U.S. government back in 2009 shut down a third of all dealerships because they theoretically wanted to streamline, improve the process. Now, most dealerships are not what? They're not owned by the megacorp. But the U.S. government wanted to have a few huge dealers, all tied to the firm and stuff like that. A lot of them, That was favor seeking. The firms went to the government to get special favors. Favor generation is related to favor seeking. This is when the government decides to yield most. This is how government officials get very, very rich. They yield over favors to their buds. Totally unethical. Again, the smaller your government is, the less damage it's going to be. But the bigger your government gets, the more damage it's going to do. So you have favor generation. This little picture here. Labrador. This is a strip of Canada on the eastern coast. Nothing else. There were strips of these little villages that had existed, fishing villages that had existed for 400 years. In fact, this is an abandoned house that was in one of the failed fishing villages. Now notice, look at this. This is a fisherman. That's a. I mean, it's decayed now, but think about it. Those are 2-story houses. Is that person, and that's at least double room back. That person had a good house. What happened? The Canadian government, in the name of saving the environment, making sure we save all those species, gave all the fishing rights to a handful of large corporations who donated money to the Liberal government, the Liberal Party in Canada. So all these little fishing villages were wiped out in a second because their means of making money, supporting themselves, are gone. The government just wiped it out. You could have had a house that's been in your family for 400 years and it's gone now. Or I should say a plot of land, because why? The Canadian government gave it to a handful of megacorps who were all tied to the Canadian government, and they wrapped them around with doing something environmental good. You know what the funny thing is? The United States, we had I think either it's a third or 40% of the fishing rights on Georges Bank. When there was the establishment for the limit on fishing there, the United States got, again, I said 1/3 or 40% of it. We gave it to all of the small fishermen. In other words, our fishermen were scattered by the market structure. occasionally by government failure, government favor. So which ones were protected? The small people were protected in going to the market. Whereas when the government decides everything, you get, this unfavored thing. And when Justin Trudeau came in, he did the same thing. He did for the West Coast. Oh, back to the me we mentioned before. We talked about when we did, environmentalism. Corruption is fine. Corruption is culturally accepted. It's okay to be corrupt, so take prides and kickbacks. Someone can be a politician. No one looks twice. The politician spending. I'm gonna pick on Lyndon Baines Johnson here, right? He spends his entire life as a public servant, teaching them, becoming a politician for a long time. He was a middle-income person. He died a multi-millionaire, potentially the richest president we ever had. Remember, we adjusted for inflation. Now, see, say what about Trump? He made his stuff actually producing goods. Not so with Lyndon Baines Johnson. Now, I know people say, no, I read Howard Zinn's History of American People. George Washington was a trillionaire. He ruled us. It's like, that idiot, not George Washington, but Howard Zinn, he lied like rug. Why did he lie like rug? Because he could. And he wanted to destroy heroes, common heroes. He made fantasy. Okay, self first. This is a big one. Me first, me last, me always. In fact, that's why you see it's the a funny clip I saw of a woman posting a clip on TikTok. This woman going like, yeah, women want the top 20% of men, and you men just have to suck it up, and that's tough luck, and blah, blah, blah. She's a lot of bad words, and the woman who had thing goes, that's funny. She talks about women all deserve the top 20% of men, but look at her. She's not the top 20% of women. And so they just ain't getting it. But she believes she has the right to that. It should be this way. Just like I said before, with the transgenderism in Canada saying people should date me. Why? Because they should be forced to. It's not fair. Because you're a dude. You're an ugly dude. It's like when, Elliot Page she did some post of herself with fake abs. So corruption, self first, me first, last, always destroys a lot of things because I'm not going to put wife or children or spouse or anyone before myself. It's all me. Entitlement. I am owed. I am owed because it works for me. It should be done for me. Everybody else owes me a living. I have no problem being a mooch on other people because they should just give it to me. The ends justifies the means. Anything to get what I want is perfectly legitimate. And I say, why do you, Stalin so much? Because he has some great quotes. He's a communist and gives the communist mentality. Immorality is praised. What is good, what is good is now called evil. What is evil is now called, and that flip around. I said, defend traditional marriage, you get in trouble. Defend male females to being alone racial, you get in trouble. Say that somebody engaging in acts that are going to shorten their lifespan by decades, how dare you? You'll get in trouble again. So immorality is praised. Evil is said to be good. Moral people are hated just for existing. In other words, when you're in a fallen culture, a really fallen culture, as I say, what I call it, lazy code, stuff like that, they won't hate moral people because just by your existence, you give lie to what they do. You say nothing bad about them, doing nothing about them, but you exist and you show how people should behave. That causes damage. Business people are hated. A lot of these places, a lot of countries teach that business people, in fact, I'll pick on Afghanistan now. Before we invaded Afghanistan, they taught that Afghanistan was poor because the United States was rich. After we're out of Afghanistan, again, the Taliban government is teaching Afghanistan is poor because Americans are rich. Afghanistan is poor because you guys have been run by morons. You run by Karzai, who was corrupt and wanted to live well. Now you run by Taliban, who may not be explicitly corrupt, but they're socialist morons. And they hate business people. Traditional families are disdained. As our children go back to the eliminate soft control population, because why? It takes away from the self. It takes away from what we want to do. The current U.S. Cultural Revolution, much like the Chinese Cultural Revolution, it seeks to destroy the existing order. It seeks to wipe it out and replace it with its new thing. Multiculturalism. Multiculturalism is often a thorny issue. And a lot of people don't like to talk about because they say, oh, because again, multiculturalism, what do people do? They attach culture to race. So when they say you're attacking a culture, you're attacking a race or ethnicity. No. Multiculturalism, you're attacking a culture. And now, if it's classic multicultural, you know about other cultures, that's fine. But cultures accept what is happening, the reality of things, stuff like that. We don't have that kind of multicultural. We have a fake multiculturalism, which just says all cultures are equal. They should all equal the same result. They should all, the A's and the D's should be getting the same, but they're not. They're not. But most cultures say they should be not destroyed. When you engage multiculturalism, you destroy equality under law, because people say people should be judged by their culture, and certain cultures should have an easier standard of being judged than others. And not being cruel. That's an impact, but you don't accept reality of what your culture is doing. You get used to blaming other people, which we're going to get to in a second. Now, you may have, every now and then, a country, a population, a people may have what I call cultural and economic freedom. Because something was done to you, you have a chance to break entirely a cultural and economic system and change to a new cultural and economic system. Now, people can do that anytime you want to, but they have a unique thing because somebody else gave you your cultural and economic system. So you can make them the other. You can say, I want this. So it's a great opportunity because countries can theoretically leave all the baggage. Countries and populations can leave all the baggage they got saying, this was done to me by the foreigners. We're going to leave the foreigners, because they may have been imperialists, but they're leaving us. We can choose their own destiny. And so it's a great opportunity. The example of this great opportunity, Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe was run by communists, and in 1989, communism fell in Eastern Europe. Loosely speaking, it just collapsed everywhere. The Eastern European countries, to a varying degree, recovered very fast from communism. Because they said, what? Communism doesn't work. The social amorality of communism doesn't work. We're going to what? We're going to become more moral. So we could break away from that. We could go for free markets. We could go for classic Christianity, because the other system was discredited. And who gave us, behind the Poles, who gave me communism? The Russians did. Those Bolsheviks in Russia came in with their men in the tanks and they imposed this on us. So they had what's called a freebie. They had a chance to revamp and skip the whole system. They could break from the past. That was a good freebie. Now they still have legacy of the damage, but they could do it easier. Because whereas the Soviet Union didn't have that freebie, because the Soviets, Russia gave themselves communism. You're communist China. You had a civil war, but you gave yourselves communism. Someone didn't impose it. An invading army did not impose their order on you. You did it to yourself. And so we have a good economic freebie, but the good economic freebie leads to a bad one. You get the idea of, I blame somebody else. They had a different economic system. Let's just say a market economy. I say that's evil. I go for heavy-end socialism or for communism. In fact, that cartoon is a communist cartoon, which is, again, propaganda. The idea of what? The capitalist, the worker's slave, and they're all chained to the machine, and the capitalist gets money for doing nothing. When we get rid of the capitalist, the workers will be free, rich, and get more goodies. Well, who provided the machine? Who said what you should make? Who directs where it's going to go? Oh, wait, you killed him because you're saying we'll get what? All these goodies. But you didn't. There was a lot of countries, when they became free, opted for a type of communism. In other words, they went for a type of communism, a heavy on socialism, government control, and it's appealed to the leaders of these governments, these countries were coming independent. Because why? They were getting rich. A lot of corruption here. They made sure they feasted mightily. But it means they squeezed everybody else. And so a lot of countries who changed, they changed from a market-based economy, a supply and demand economy, and they shifted into a heavy-end socialist or borderline communist economy. The government's running everything, and they like that because they're going to run the government. And they did this item. And that is brutal in terms of its impact. That's a bad freebie because it trapped you. You made a decision. The first thing people did while independent, when becoming independent, was to do something that didn't work. That's a killer. It was great talking to you guys. I hope all is good.